Welcome to part 3 of the Dashing Table Runner Quilt Along that we're doing over Labor Day weekend, September 2021. Again, I would like to show you my sample for the Quilt Along, and I'd like to point out in this example the orange here. I put my table runners together thinking I was doing the right thing by putting the darkest square in the middle. But after I got it finished, I realized, wow, you can see the orange much better. Your eye is drawn to that. So if I was making this again, I would put the orange in the center. I kind of corrected that in my example. I'll show you a little bit later. Your homework for yesterday was to make 3 churn dash blocks. I hope you had fun doing that. And today's task is to add the sashing between the blocks and the borders. At first I thought I was going to use the same fabric that I had for the background of my blocks as sashing, but I found a print in my stash that's white with blue swirls, and I thought that gave a little difference, a little bit different texture, so that's what I used. To make the sashing and first border, you need to cut 4 strips 2.5 inches wide by the width of fabric from selvage to selvage. One of those strips you will cut to be the sashing between the blocks. The blocks should be measuring 13 inches square. To tell the truth, mine measured 12 7/8 inches, which means my seam allowance was just a little bit wide. But at this point, the main thing is for all 3 of your blocks to measure the same width. Mine were 12 7/8, so I cut these sashing pieces 12 7/8 inches long, and I sewed them between the blocks. And I put the citrine in the center since it is the most luminous, and I have my darker blocks to the outside. The next step is very important. You want to take 2 of the strips that you cut 2.5 by with the fabric and sew them to the sides of your quilt. It's important to do these next because at this point your runner is about 40 inches or 41 inches long, and so you need to add these strips before you add the end pieces so that you don't have to piece them. After you've added the sashing and first border, it's time to work on your patchwork outer border. You will need for the sides of your quilt 10 of the 5-inch squares from your charm pack. Think about alternating colors and textures, maybe even think about alternating darks with lighter fabrics. You will cut those 10 squares in half, so they'll measure 2.5 by 5 inches, and then sew them together end to end. And I sew them in the same order. For the top border, I sewed them this way, then I reversed the whole strip 180 degrees and sewed it to the other side. The runner is about the same length as sewing all of those 5-inch lengths together, so don't take a wide seam allowance. If anything, take a scant seam allowance when you're sewing these 2.5 by 5-inch rectangles together. After you have sewn them and pressed them toward the light inner border, it's time to work on the ends of the table runner. For the ends, you will need 5 of the 5-inch squares. Cut them in half and sew them together. Then find the center of the runner and the center of the strip of rectangles that you've sewn together and pin the centers together. Then you pin outward from there. You notice there is a little bit left over, and you can trim that off when you're finished. So this is part 3 of our Dashing Table Runner quilt, and that's your homework for the next section, to put the borders on the runner. And then after that, you'll be quilting and binding it. Remember that you can find instructions for this quilt along on my blog, abbyquilts.wordpress.com.